Hey everyone, Tiger the Leading Cert Nerd with my reaction and thoughts to this afternoon's chemistry paper. Um, I suppose my overall thought is that overall I think it was a fair exam, and most of the questions were all right, but there was definitely tricky parts in some of the questions. Um, I think anybody aiming for kind of a middle grade like H5, H4, maybe even H3, I think you all will be okay for the most part. I think people may be aiming for the H2s, H1s may have struggled a bit with some parts of some questions, but we'll go through it anyway. So, first things first, students who opened paper on question one would have been very happy to see that we did get the ethanoic acid titration as was very highly predicted, and we did get it. And the question itself was very nice. It was very standard for the titration, and this one specifically and all the usual stuff you're expecting, like the procedural stuff. And yeah, your dilutions, indicators, color changes, titrations, calculations, all that kind of stuff. Very nice question to start off with. No complaints there. So moving on to question two, then the organic experiment. And this year I was expecting benzoic acid, and was a full question. We did see benzoic acid as part A of this question, and another one that was predicted was soap, and that came up as well in part C. Then we had test with ethanol there thrown in the middle as well. And overall, this question was very nice. I think parts B and C definitely were very nice, very doable. Part A was possibly a bit on the trickier side. Then again, the benzoic acid experiment always is. It's one of the trickier experiments on the course. But yeah, I think overall students would have been happy enough with that question if they had been prepared for it. And then question three, another very nice question, and was another one that I predicted was going to be I said it would either be the effect of concentration on the rate of reaction or the volatile liquid. We got the concentration on the rate of reaction. And yeah, this was a very nice question. All the kind of like standard stuff that comes up with this experiment, like your graphing, and seeing how you measure the rate of the reaction, like yeah, graphing, reading from your graph, all that kind of stuff. All the standard with this experiment that's all come up before if you had to practice this. You should have been fine with this question. They did throw in the other experiment, the temperature investigation at the end, kind of, but I mean, that was very straightforward. It was like, how do you measure? How do you heat temperature? How do you heat reactants and then measure the temperature? You use a hot plate and a thermometer. Like that's very straightforward. And then as for which one of these three had the fastest or had the highest temperature, it was obviously going to be T2 because the reaction was fastest. And we know that at a higher temperature, reactions are faster. So yeah, question three, very straightforward. So overall with section A, I would say I'm very happy. I think students would have definitely, I think if you had studied, I think question one and question two were very, very doable if you had studied them and they were going to be one of your questions. Question two may have been slightly trickier, but still very doable. So overall section A, very good. So section B, then we'll start with question four, your short questions. And these were a bit of a mix, I would say. Overall, I think there were okay parts A. Actually, looking through them now, most of them are actually okay. And part D, maybe confuse some. You were applying Avogadro's law. So basically, the moles of these two gases were the same. So that's your Avogadro calculation. And yeah, the half equation, the electrochemistry equation, might have thrown some. Probably wasn't expecting electrochemistry given that we saw it last year. But and yeah, you see that the principle of chromatography that we've not seen in a couple of years. I want to say they're three or four. So that was definitely due up that definition. And then a kind of easy enough organic calculation involving what is this? Benzocaine. That was very straightforward. The option questions there. Nice enough as well. The only thing now that I'm a bit kind of nearly disappointed by is part E, stating the standard units of ionization and BOD. given that in the chemistry exam, there is never really emphasis put on units, like you never need units in your answers. It's never in bold in the marking scheme, and you never lose marks for units. That I think is a bit unfair than asking students what are units when you're never really forced to learn them. Now, you can get the first ionization energy units from your log tables. It's on page 80, I think. BOD, you'd have to know it's parts per million. So yeah, that might have stung a couple of students. But I think overall it should have been very doable, I think, to get 8 short questions there. And question 5, I will admit I was expecting the periodic table. Didn't happen. We got atomic structure, not atomic structure, electron arrangements and Bohr's theory. And this was a very nice question. Part A, as I said, based around Bohr's theory, and all standard stuff there. There was nothing trying to catch you out there. And part B then, Heisenberg uncertainty principle, fine. And the SP configuration is normally fine. The key thing here is that they were looking for the number of electrons in each atomic orbital. So what I take from that is that normally, whereas you could just write 2s2, 2p6, and so on, what I get from that is that they wanted you to write down 2px2, 2py2, 2pz2. Now, whether that's going to be the case or not, we'll see when the marking scheme comes out, but that's what I take from that. And I don't know if every student would have picked up on that, but I mean, I guess we'll see. So that was probably the only thing in that question that may have caught some students out. I think, though, everything else in that question is okay, we've seen it before. So overall, question 5, happy. Question 6 then is the fuels and heats of reaction. And this question was very nice. It normally always is. Part A based around hydrocarbons and naming them. Easy stuff you're just dealing with. When we hear octane and 2,2,4-trimethylpentane, which we see on the exam all the time. So there was no surprises there. Then talking about going from A to B, and again, standard question. Drawing structures, naming. Part C, again, straightforward enough. And then part D, as always, we get our calculation, which again was nothing tricky, nothing trying to surprise you there. And part 2, slightly unusual that we haven't seen before, but you're just applying the numbers you were given to this equation up here to solve for the heat of reaction. May have required some thought because it's never really been asked before, but again, once you actually carry it out, it's actually not that hard to do. Question 7 then was chemical equilibrium. I have to admit, I was surprised by this. I thought equilibrium would have been a 25-mark question, given that it's been 50 marks for the past, I want to say about 4 years already. But I mean, look, it's a nice question, especially given the fact that it was the easier kind of KC calculation, which was very nice compared to we got the harder one last year. So we got the easy one this year, which I'm sure people would have been very happy about. So yeah, that was your part A, was very standard. Part B, then you just had to do it at the table again for different amounts. That was very straightforward. Explaining changes in KC, remembering obviously that only temperature affects KC. And then how would you increase KC? So because it's only affected by temperature, and in this case, because this delta H is negative, so the forward reaction is exothermic. So if you decrease temperature, you will get more products. And because your products go on the top of your KC fraction, that will give you a higher. So you're looking for a lower temperature there, was your answer. And an effective catalyst. On equilibrium, we see all the time. So yeah, question 7 was very nice as well. Question 8, organic chemistry. This one I feel could have gone either way. I personally thought it was actually an okay question, which I normally don't say about questions. I tend to find them quite hard. But I have heard some people say this question was actually very tough. And what that comes down to really is how you found the mechanisms. If you are a person who likes the organic mechanisms, you would have found this question very easy. If you didn't like them, then this question would have been quite hard. And this was based around the mechanism for ethene. Ethene and chlorine was the one you were asked. Sorry, ethane and chlorine, not ethene. And I thought ethene was the one we were going to see, but it was ethane. So yeah, describing that mechanism, giving evidence for it. That all has been seen before, but it also can be quite tricky when it comes up. They can be hard to memorize. So some may have struggled there. And then part C was based around the synthesis of PVC, polyvinyl chloride, ethene, and that part was actually okay. That was nice enough. All that stuff has kind of been asked before, as far as I can tell. Yeah, so you're drawing, explaining the process. Once you knew your intermediaries, like what was formed in between, and that question would have been okay. So it wasn't an easy question, but I think it's one of the nicer organic ones we've seen in recent years, especially compared to, I think it was 2 years ago. That was definitely a bit nicer. Question 9 now is acids, base, pH. And this now was a tricky question. I think. So part A, based on acids and bases, that part was okay. And explaining why NH3 is a base, but is also not a base, which makes total sense. And then identifying conjugate acids and bases, that was fine. And the pH of pure water, why it changes, and may have caught some people that it not come up very often, if at all. And the reason is because of pH temperature. And then explaining why dilution will affect pH. It will decrease it because you're getting less concentrated, there'll be less H plus ions. And then just calculating concentration given pH and K. That's come up many times before. So there was plenty of practice could have been had at that kind of calculation. Part C then was kind of based on equilibrium. Would have been slightly tricky maybe if you'd chosen to skip over equilibrium. And then part D, again, some people are put off by titration curves, but actually it's a very straightforward question. Well, I wouldn't say straightforward, sorry, but very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very doable. There we go. Once you just read through it carefully, make sure you know what you were doing. So yeah, overall not too bad, but it was probably on the trickier end in this paper. Question 10 then. As predicted, we got a redox question. And this was very nice, it was very standard. So like your definition, oxidation numbers, and then you're just balancing any equation, identifying reducing agent. That is all very straightforward. And I think the numbers in this for balancing this, they end up being quite big. But I mean, once you just stuck to your instincts and your methods, I think this was actually okay. And part B then was radioactivity. This was actually quite surprising given that we'd seen radioactivity last year as well. But it was an alpha decay question, as would have been, I suppose, predicted if this had come up. And yeah, that question was very straightforward, very doable. Small bit of calculation one at the end that I suppose maybe if you weren't big into your stoichiometry may have caught you off guard a bit at the end. But yeah, that was quite nice. And then part C, the actual stoichiometry question was actually very, very nice compared to the trend in the last couple of years. The stoichiometry has been extremely difficult, especially looking at both last year, definitely the year before as well. We've gotten some of the hardest questions we've ever seen in recent years. And this one was very back to basics and very straightforward equation, straightforward calculations. So yeah, I think people who are good at stoichiometry and had practiced it well would have been very happy with that question. And then question 11, part A, based on bonding. And this is to do with boron trifluoride. Now, usually boron's always a bit of a red flag because it can be a bit strange in the way it bonds. But this one was actually okay. And again, you're saying why it's polar or non-polar. So in this case, For the bond itself, you would look at the electronegativity difference. And then when you're looking at the molecule as a whole, you're looking at its symmetry to see whether it's polar or non-polar. Predicting shapes, that's just using your VSEPR theory, and then saying whether they're soluble or not soluble in water. Part B then was more organic chemistry. This time it was actually just naming compounds. Now they had here where O represents the CH3 group or dash represents the C2H5 group. That kind of annoyed me, I'll be honest. Like that's like just put in the CH3 group. Like why wouldn't you? Like to me, that isn't it, just adding an extra step when the extra step doesn't need to be there. So I didn't really understand why the examiner did that. But I think once you drew them in correctly, and then probably draw out the full structure yourself if you chose to do that, and naming those would have been very straightforward. That's like a basic skill in organic chemistry, like you're nearly naming compounds with your eyes closed. Then identifying B as a primary or secondary alcohol. And it would be a secondary alcohol because you have a C. The COH is going to be bonded to two other carbons. That can make it a secondary alcohol. And then part C based on water and water treatment. Slightly tricky question, which is unusual for water, tends to be quite straightforward. You had to know formulas and ions quite well, which you don't always need to know. So I don't always need to know, but it's never really get my words mixed up. It's not always asked in that level of detail. So it may have been tricky for some people. But yeah, and then for the option A was based on ozone and CFCs, which was definitely not to be expected because that one came up whereas in the last few years anyway. So that, but it's definitely not a hard question. And then option B, the materials question was yeah, it was standard enough for that. That topic it was based on kind of the iron refining, which we've seen many times before. So that should have been hopefully very doable for people who chose that, or the few people of you who do that option. So yeah, overall, I think it was a fair paper. I wouldn't say it was easy by any means, and we definitely had easier papers in the past, but we've also definitely have had harder papers in the past. So hopefully you found the exam okay. And if you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'll get back to you. We can discuss, we can have a debate. And yeah, to those of you who are now finished your leaving cert, congratulations, and I hope you're happy, hope it went well. Those of you who are still going, pushing on into the end of this week, I mean, God forbid, into the start of next week. And it's the final push, so don't give in now. And yeah, well done to you all for finishing your chemistry exam. Yes. So yeah, that's it. All the best, people.